Is the... You ready, Marianne?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hey, Joseph.
Okay, ready.
Good morning. Welcome to the final meeting of the Santa Clara County Joint Foster Youth Task Force. My name is Scott Strickland. I'm Chief of Staff to Supervisor Cindy Chavez, who is unable to be here because of a family commitment, and I'm joined with the County Superintendent of Schools, Marianne Dewan. If we could introduce ourselves, starting with Ms. LaRue.
Jennifer Kelleher-Floyd on behalf of the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley.
Christina Anaya, Youth Engagement Specialist at the Hub and former foster youth.
Dane Caldwell-Holden, representing San Jose Unified School District.
Kathy Martinez, Deputy Chief with Probation. I'm here for Chief Garnett, who is at a mandatory meeting in Sacramento and apologizes for not being able to make it today.
Chris Funk, Superintendent, Eastside Union High School District.
Mario Montemayor with the Mentor Parent Program.
Dante Lartique, community member at the Hub and former founding member.
Joseph DeSalvo, Santa Clara County Office of Education, Board of Education.
Good morning, Sherry Terrell, Director of Children, Youth, and Family System of Care with the Behavioral Health Services Department.
Good morning, Annalisa Chung, Dependency Advocacy Center.
John Hogan with Silicon Valley Children's Fund and Teen Force.
Thank you very much. We move to item 2 on the agenda, which is public comment for those members of the public who wish to address the task force on a member that's on an item that is or an issue that is not on the agenda. So is there anyone here who would like to speak to the task force on an item that is not on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we move to item 3, the approval of the consent agenda. There's one item, which is the minutes of the March 8th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda in those minutes? Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, then that is adopted. So now we move to item 4, which is the reason we're all here, which is the final draft of the final recommendations of this task force, and we have extra copies in the on the back table over there for members of the public, and all of us have a hard copy, and this was posted yesterday morning by the clerk of the board on our out to everyone. I'd like to make some comments that reflect what's happened since the last time you considered this last week. Gabby Ornelas and I were taking notes from the discussion that folks had at the last meeting, and then we also encouraged folks to send us any changes up to a hard deadline of 5 p.m. and one day last week. And so we incorporated every one of those changes except for, I think, 5. Okay. One suggested change that we did not incorporate. I just want to tell you what we did not incorporate. One change that we did not incorporate was in the recommendations section. They're basically it's organized under 3 objectives. Basically, before entry in the system, and the second is like right at the verge of entering the system, and the third is actually when the child is in the system. And it was suggested that we also just add subcategories of housing and employment and education and data. And we chose not to do that, and the reason was that originally we had organized the recommendations that way, And in Cindy's view, it looked like a list, and she thought that we should really, that what was really important about the recommendations is that it's not a list, it's an approach. And that if we frame it as an approach rather than just a list, that would emphasize the system change aspect as opposed to just a bunch of reforms, however valid those reforms are. And so because of that, we chose in this draft to keep the three, organize it as the three objectives. All the recommendations are still in there. There was another recommendation to change the vision statement to reflect some of the reforms that are just very, the system reforms that are just very generally reflected in the statement, but the statement really emphasizes the system change aspect, which is before people get in the system and right when they can be diverted from the system with more services. And so we did not change the vision statement in this draft. And then there was, we had two that we, John, you had mentioned two others in an email. One was the split between recommendations 13 and 14, which we split at your request from the last meeting, and so we can fix that. And then, because we carried over one thing, but we didn't carry over another, so we can fix that. And then you caught the typo in the objective 4, so we'll catch that. And then there were two other suggestions that we did not incorporate. One was a suggestion to we had a statement in the problem statement that said that certain changes caused trauma to children, and we had a suggestion to change that to a may cause trauma, but there was a footnote at the end of that sentence that attributed a source that actually said that it does cause trauma. So we thought that to keep the integrity of the source, we would keep that the same. And then the final thing that we did not change, there was a suggestion that we not state in the problem statement that foster families have difficulty navigating the system, and we found that was actually a finding of one of our ad hoc subcommittees, and also was reaffirmed by the JWU report. And although there's a lot of just anecdotal backup for that, we thought that really reflected the sense of the committee as a whole. So we didn't make that change. Everything else we popped in here. So what we would like to do is to, as Cindy said last week, to go through this page by page and have folks present any changes that they might still want to make. And then the committee can go ahead and proceed. So if that's okay, we can do that. We have one card from the public. We're expecting another one. So at this stage, I'd like to call one member of the public before we start down the committee, and then when the other person comes, if we have another public speaker, we can just take them when they show up. Is that okay? Okay.
I would also like to just make a comment about process and what happens after today's meeting. So the intent would be that today we would be able to secure final recommendation and support of the task force members, and then we would be moving these recommendations on to the full Board of Supervisors for presentation. And also that we would be making a report to the County Board of Education also to share with them the recommendations of the task force.
Quick question. I appreciate you walking through the changes, but as I was reading, I stopped following along. And is there a reason why we didn't do strike-throughs, since it's an official change from the last time, so we know what the changes were?
Yes. The reason was inadvertence.
Okay. So maybe as we're going page by page, if you remind us.
Okay.
Because as you pointed the first one out, I started to read and then I
Right.
got behind. So I apologize, but.
Well, no, I apologize, Superintendent. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so at this time, Ben Gonzalez. And if you could approach the, 3 minutes, yeah. And according to our policy here at the county, you have 3 minutes.
Just speaker. Oh, awesome. Good afternoon. My name is Ben Gonzalez. I'm the Coordinator of Health and Wellness for the Santa Clara Unified School District. And in my position, I am also the Foster Youth Liaison for Santa Clara Unified School District. And it is in that capacity I speak before you today. First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking this on. This is such an important topic, and as we know, our students who are foster really do have a disadvantage within our academic circles, and supporting them in a holistic way is so important. So I just would like to first of all start by thanking you on that. There is one thing I would like to address in the document under, I think it's objective 3, points 13 through 16. It talks about needing to create academic parity, employment parity, and also work readiness within those. I have, over the course of this year, have been participating with the FION, and those are the exact topics that we have been trying to take on and organizing around. And it is a group of people from all different types of organizations that really have those goals in mind. The request I would make is that these pieces, I see in 16, it is explicitly called out as having some sort of ownership over some of these objectives. I would request that we have 13 through 15 maybe explicitly call out the FION as a sort of body that can own those pieces. I think having that occur would create a sense of ownership and some accountability for achieving these objectives, and I think the group is really uniquely positioned to see these objectives out, as we know that there's a clear connection between educational parity and preparedness leads to employment parity and preparedness, and I think those are really equally connected, and seeing those as a continuum that are leading one into the other, I think would be an important piece. And again, sort of laying that at the footstep of the FION and having some ownership, I think would be a really important step to ensuring that those outcomes are achieved. So I appreciate your consideration and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there anyone else who'd like to address the task force at this time? We'll hold open the opportunity to speak publicly in case somebody comes a little later. So if we can go to page 3 of the statement, if we don't mind walking through. So this is the vision statement, and this is one we chose not to change from the version you saw last time. So is there a will to make a change here? John.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I just, because I had put that comment out, I wanted to try to explain what I was trying to accomplish with my suggestion was, I think the document as a whole and the vision statement, we really are rightfully emphasizing that the cure for foster care is to prevent entry and focus on poverty and supporting families and and I think that's absolutely true. But I feel like the vision statement should speak a little more strongly to the youth that do enter the system. That when youth do enter the system, that we should talk about a community commitment that they should have outcomes at parity with the general population, and that's all outcomes, whether not limiting to education and employment, but I just feel like we're a little light on recognizing that purely prevention isn't the only thing that this task force is about and that we should be about. So That was my thinking. My recommendation would be that we have a sentence, just one sentence that says, for youth who do enter the child welfare system, and especially those who go to permanent placement, that we must have a community commitment to raise them as we would our own, with the goal of them achieving outcomes that mirror the general population. Just feel like that it should be part of our vision. So.
And where did you want to add that sentence, John?
You know, I would probably try to put it in, you know, right after the paragraph that says the best way to improve is to prevent. So after that sentence or paragraph, recognize for those that did enter the system and, you know, it went to permanent placement.
Yeah, I think it's a good fit as the new second sentence of that paragraph, so that's all we can do.
So,
thank you. Anything else on vision statement, page 3? Okay. Now we move into the problem statement. Now, some of you actually corrected some typos, and I don't think we need to actually go over each typo, but we especially want to thank Francesca and John, because they found the most of our mistakes, more of our mistakes than the rest of you. But thank you. So on pages 4 and 5, Gabby, were there any substantive changes on 4 and 5? Not just typos, but
On 4 and 5. Sometime the system. No, not that I can account for. No.
okay. So this is substantively the same as what you saw at the last meeting. Does anything come to mind now on the beginning, this preamble to the problem statement, pages?
Oh, the first sentence would be
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We added the first sentence, which is hundreds of highly qualified and well-intentioned people are doing their best for children who are at risk for maltreatment. That leads into the statement of all of the resources, where we also corrected some numbers thanks to Francesca's prompt, and we also added the school districts as well as the County Office of Education in that.
And then we also added a little bit to the second paragraph, the last sentence, so that it can be more accurate.
Right. And that sentence is, if the maltreatment allegation is substantiated and the safety assessment deems the child to be unsafe under the parent's care after the completed investigation, penetration by the foster care system into the family's life is inevitable. And Lisa, your light's on? Oh, that's John's light. Okay, great. Okay, so we're good there. Okay. So if we turn to page 6, we're on the educational outcomes, and there were no changes to this part of the problem statement. Anything there? Okay, then page 7 begins the employment outcomes. Gabby, any substantive changes there?
And not in employment.
Okay, we're not, so anything there? Okay, we move to page 8, health outcomes. There are no substantive changes there because Gabby's shaking her head.
No changes?
Okay. Page 9, housing and ILP development outcomes.
It's on page 10. Nothing on page 9.
Okay. Okay, so then going to page 11, the foster family placement outcomes.
I updated the, I'm so sorry, it's on page 9, but I updated the definition of ILPs. Sure, I'm not sure it's on page 9. Oh, I'm sorry, it is on page 10, right at the beginning.
And what is that on page 10, Gabby?
So the sentence starts on page 9, but would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
The Independent Living Program was established in Santa Clara County to provide institutional supports, including case management and peer engagement services that assist current and former foster youth ages 16 to 21.
Okay.
I have a clarifying question on that. Is established in Santa Clara County by whom? Is it by the county, by a particular department or division? Like who would be the owner of the ILP?
Okay, I'll include that.
Francesca, do you happen to know the answer to that?
So it's a state bill, and it was implemented by Department of Family Children Services.
Okay, so implemented under state authority by the County Department of the DFCS.
Family, yes.
Right,
Family.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Chris. Yeah, sure.
Maybe comment on this, but just the reference to chronic absenteeism in the footnote, we actually don't define chronic absenteeism. We give examples if someone is absent, suspended, excused, unexcused, but chronic absenteeism is actually missing 10% of the school year at any point of the year. So I'm just wondering if it would behoove us to actually put the true definition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. No, that's just fine. So, so is there anything before page 11? This is okay, so now we're on page 11 with the foster family placements outcome. And
I did change the data recorded to reflect more current data. And then additionally, the sentence right after, I changed it to be more accurate. It says the above data shows that foster families constitute 66.5% of the total out-of-home care placements.
Can I just ask a clarifying question about that? Because, and Francesca, this is probably a question for you. Under resource family placement, that's probably a mix, right, of foster and relative? Correct. So I don't know that the 66.5% is actually, the problem is we're in the middle of transitioning what people are called, so I think this data is confusing in that way.
Okay.
Jennifer, go ahead.
It's like there it is. Delayed reaction here. In 2017, foster families shifted to resource families, and relatives and typically referred to as licensed foster parents fell under the same category. And so now the CWSCMS is deciphering those two different areas. I believe, Gabriela, did you use the 2017 final data for DFCS? So this is the breakout as it is given CWSCMS. So perhaps if we just put a footnote to clarify that resource family placements may include some relative NRFMs. It's a technicality.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Francesca, do you actually know, I know it's not perfect, but the approximate percentage of kids in relative placement total in out of home? It's like 30, isn't it?
Like 38%.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So that's why I do think this is, the 66% is definitely misleading.
Okay.
Okay. So that first sentence should be, the one with the 66.5 should be clarified.
Yes.
So, and we need to rewrite it to reflect that the real number is what, 38%?
Okay.
And if you'd like, I can provide you with January and February data to be reflected in the footnotes so that because now the system is cleaning up.
Oh, that would be
That
helpful.
way,
So going
That'd be
forward,
great.
it's more clear.
Yes.
Great, okay.
yes.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Anything else on foster family placements outcomes on 11 and 12? Okay.
No.
Joe, I have your card, and when we have a break, we'll take you, okay? And now we move to,
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I do have something on page 11. Last paragraph, starting with, as DFCS moves forward in implementing California's continuum of care, about 300 additional foster youth? Why additional? If our efforts are to prevent, why would we have 300 additional? That's not my goal.
yeah, it doesn't say that it's a goal.
Well,
it's
no,
an
but the way that it
expectation,
reads, it sounds like we're going
but
to
it
have.
does, yeah.
That was a point that was that arose in the ad hoc subcommittee. Said that saying that there's going to be 300 foster youth in need, given the transition to the STRTPs, I think.
So that was
So is
my
that-
committee. I know we're throwing around the number of approximately 100, and that was just based on kids transitioning, that kids that our best guess are in group homes that won't meet the criteria for STRTP. So we were estimating 100. I definitely don't recall ever saying 300.
Okay, Jennifer, was that 100 or 100 additional?
What we anticipated about 100 current youth who right now are designated as a group home placement will need to be transitioned into a lower level of care. So that was where that number came from, and that's an estimate. But definitely I don't think we were ever talking about like an upsurge in foster youth entering the system, which is the way this reads.
So these are current foster youth, of which there's going to be a change in placement for 100.
Well, we currently have 79 children in group homes. I think the sentence represents that these 79 youth, or
Right.
if you want to make
Yeah,
it 80,
Right.
would need a resource family home-based placement.
Home-based placement. Okay.
Transition
All right.
to.
Got that, Gabby? Okay, so we can correct that. That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Anything else on 11 and 12? Okay, moving to 12, permanency outcomes.
There were no changes to permanency outcomes.
Oh, what was that, Gabriella?
There were no changes to permanency outcomes.
Okay. Did anybody catch something in permanency outcomes nonetheless? Okay.
Actually, the second paragraph on page 12, resulting in 300 inactive approved foster families many foster parents are choosing. I don't understand that sentence.
Yeah, I was
What does that mean? This is the second paragraph on page 12. Starts with resulting in 300 inactive.
There are currently 300 inactive. I can make that clear. There are currently 300 inactive approved foster families, and the ad hoc subcommittee identified that foster parents were not choosing to accept children because they had difficult experiences fostering a past child.
Okay, and that's what resulted in
Yeah,
300. Okay.
I can make that clear.
I would take exception to stating that 300 of these foster families express that the reason they're not active is because their experience was due to a lack of support. We don't have any data to support that that is in fact accurate, that 300 of the inactive made that statement.
Because many of them might have had a difficult experience even if they had really great support. Right.
I don't know that there's no survey. We don't have any data to say that the 300 inactive are not active because they didn't receive support. In fact, I sent all inactive foster parents a letter for the Christmas time, And I did receive some responses back from caregivers saying, I'm inactive because I just adopted. And so it's a mix. And so this reads as if all 300 are inactive because they didn't receive the support, but there's various reasons why they're inactive.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is sort of putting two separate points from our report together. Francesca provided this number of inactive, and then separately, we were doing some fact-finding about perhaps why some foster parents were choosing not to take additional kids, but I don't think they came from the same source. So I agree with that. I mean, I think we know potentially that's some of this 300, but we can't say how many it is. I think that's fair.
Okay, great. I think we can break that up.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
So Jennifer, would you be saying then it would be accurate to say some foster parents reported?
Yes.
Okay.
That's fair.
That they would choose not to accept, okay.
Okay. So, Gabriella, were there any changes on the permanency outcomes, page 12 and 13?
I'm sorry, I found another one on page 12. It's that same statement, 1, 2, 3, third paragraph, starting with many, last sentence.
Oh,
It
the
says that
300.
there will be around 300 more youth.
Yeah, well,
I have striked it because it's just repetition.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Permanency outcomes.
Sorry.
Going once, going twice? Okay, I think we're good there. Okay, now we go to, we had this summary page of the JWU report. That's, there are no changes in that from you seeing us before. Okay, now we're into the recommendations, and I fail to tell you that there was one suggestion by the committee that we would certainly welcome your help in, and that is that at the previous meeting, it was the consensus of the task force to put in hard number goals wherever possible. And we already had them under educational and employment because the goal is parity with the general population by the year 2027. So we had one there. We were looking around for other opportunities, and we felt that the only one that we could actually put in a goal was a hard number goal was which one, Gabriella, is the 80% in? The family finding?
Family finding.
Right.
It is under number 4.
Number 4, yeah. So there, because we had a county commitment to place 80% of foster children in some relative placement, and we felt because of the experience in LA, we could maybe justify that number, but we were very cautious about putting hard numbers in the rest of these. So if anybody has a hard number goal, we would welcome you explaining why it should be in there. So let's. So with that being said, let's go to page 15. And did we have any changes, Gabriella, on this page?
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
15. The 15 is the recommendations.
Number 1, I'm not understanding it. Prevent entry into child welfare system wherever possible by helping families in providing child well-being.
Yeah, that's, again, children enter the system when they're unsafe, and we were working under Fred Wolshin's work that indicated that protection was one element of well-being, so that if you had well-being, that would be a child would be thriving and educationally and medically and in all ways, developmentally, including being safe. And so that goal we were embracing the goal of providing child well-being across the board, hoping that all children would be thriving and being in a state of well-being. And if that were the case, then clearly there would be no maltreated children or fewer.
I'm wondering if it's a matter of semantics, like in providing for their child's well-being or the well-being of their child.
Perhaps. I mean, there's our goals are permanency, well-being, or safety, well-being, and permanency. And so the way that it reads here,
well, again, this isn't the goal. This isn't the task force recommendations to be the goal of DFCS. It's the recommendation of our unified system of all county departments and our partners in cities and school districts and our nonprofit partners generally, including First Five and everybody else who's doing things that trying to do work that prevents children from being maltreated and even not doing well.
So what was, Marianne, you made a suggestion? I think that would,
I was just suggesting perhaps rewording the end of that first statement. So starting with by helping families and providing for the well-being of their child.
Yeah, I think that's, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That's a good clarification. Okay. Anything else on page 15?
Number 3, second bullet needs a comma because the others have a comma. So.
I'm sorry, Francesca, you're talking about the more cohesive and trauma-informed?
Yes.
And what was your point about that?
It just needs a comma.
Oh, thank you.
Scott?
John.
Excuse me. I wonder if at the end of 3, more evidence-informed, I think that implies data-driven, but maybe just to say and data-driven? Because we...
where it says, that was our intent under more evidence-informed. So you think it would be better if it said more evidence-informed and data-driven?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we have, 3, 4 recommendations that are really built around data.
Anybody have a problem with that? Okay. Anything else on 15? Okay. So now we move into the actual recommendations. And we start with recommendation 1. And Gabriella, did we have a change there?
We had one change, is the bullet point under it, in which it says, this recommendation seeks to leverage community and agency partnerships to collaboratively prevent system involvement. These may include the CAN Center, School Link Services, County Districts, Data Zone, the Hub, the Dually Involved Youth Pilot, and current bail reform efforts.
Yes, Annalisa.
I was just going to say for that portion that Gabriella just added, if we could just specifically call out CBOs as one of the opportunities to leverage here, I believe that was the intent, and I think it would be nice to reflect that in.
Okay. Should we mention CBOs generally, highlight that generally, or did you want to call out any in particular?
I think generally would be fine. I think the point being that there are so many organizations in the county that are doing prevention type work or work that could be used for prevention services that I'd like to acknowledge that that's a resource to be tapped.
Okay. Okay, anything else on 1? Okay, 24 to go. Yeah? Yeah.
For number 1,
Steve.
You could also add, as one of the groups, the Child Abuse Prevention Council and also the Juvenile Justice Council. And for whatever this is worth, current bail reform efforts really are not the same as everything else that's listed under this. It really, not going too much into this, I know why it's there and I get it, but that's really not related to anything else that's under that bullet point. That seems like it's kind of a separate.
Okay, all right.
The other programs are specific programs and agencies that help
Right.
families and kids out. That's a whole other ball of wax with bail reform.
Right. I know that Cindy sees a connection there because of keeping parents from needlessly being in jail and then losing their kids because of that, or having their children removed because they're in jail when they don't need to be. So that's the nexus. But I understand it's not a program, so that would be something we could. I think you raise a good point of draftsmanship.
For this one as well, if we're adding these other agencies, the councils and community-based organizations, I wonder if we might also want to make a statement about the work we would do with these agencies and organizations to ensure that they would carry out their services and work in alignment with the philosophy, the values, the view of the system that we've presented in the task force recommendations. Someone could say it perhaps more eloquently than I just did, but the idea that if we're really thinking to reform the system, relying on current organizations who may not have been a part of the task force and may not have benefited from the conversations that we've had together, how we might ensure or expose them to those values and beliefs around child well-being and prevention, reducing trauma, et cetera, so that they would have more capacity to deliver services in the system in the way that we've designed it as part of our recommendation.
And Lisa?
And I would agree with that. I think that makes good sense. I don't know if that language gets drafted here today right now, but I think it's a good idea. And it goes a little bit into, I don't mean to move on, but my comment as to two, which is the prevention of a creation of a one-year prevention task force. I think that might be a location to do something like that and to really call together all of those organizations that we mentioned in section 1. The number 2, as it's written, it talks about a task force that can deliver certain things. And while I think that can be the end result of the identification of a plan and the creation of a plan, eventual service delivery can happen as a result of that. I do think that these things overlap a little bit more than is referenced.
I agree.
Yeah, clearly do. Okay.
I have a comment on number 3.
Okay.
I recommend striking during their initial interview with the social worker. I think specifically one optional role of the mentor program would be to be present as an objective support for a system-involved parent, period.
Okay. If we strike that language, then it could be at any point, including in the initial interview. Steve?
Should recommendation number 2 be under objective 1?
That seems pretty obvious to me, yeah. Right. Yeah, it seems clearly. We'll move that up. Okay.
Scott?
You got the comment. I got the
Kathy.
Excuse
That's what we're here for.
I think, and if I can back up to Mary Ann's comment in terms of the system reform and the reliance and leveraging other community partners, maybe we can have a separate bullet and include the other efforts of the jail reform system that are aimed at system processes or reform efforts to prevent removal or unnecessary removal of children that impact parents. So having a separate bullet and
Under
somehow
one.
combining those two.
Yeah, another bullet. Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Scott, can I go back to number 3 and Francesca's suggestion? And mainly, Laura's not here, so I know that Laura and Darlene, when they made this recommendation, they were specifically identifying the initial interview as a problem point. And I think right now we already have an optional role of a mentor parent being present generally. I mean, that's something the system has, but I think we were really talking about the idea of trust being built up front. So I just want to note that if we take that out, I do think that changes the meaning. So if we do that,
It does change the meaning.
Yeah.
Because
And I'm fairly confident Chief Garnett would make a strenuous objection.
And I would argue the point that it's important that if we're going to have system change, that it's the social worker that begin to make that connection and proper engagement with the family. I think that the second sentence that talks about using the approach used by the probation department allows for exploration of that. So the way that I'm reading it, putting the period after involved parent doesn't take away that we would be able to explore the probation corridor program. And if that program fits DFCS's model or approach, then that can be incorporated. We currently use cultural brokers for that same exact reason. So I'm just, I believe it's too specific, initial interview with the social worker. Doesn't say which social worker, so could be, but I think it's implied that it's DFCS social worker.
Yeah, I think that's clear. Okay. Well, here we have a case where we don't have a consensus. So Cindy and Superintendent Dewan are going to need to have a sense of the committee here. So we're going to take an informal vote, and we're going to vote on whether or not we want to strike the words during their initial interview with a social worker or not. Okay, so if you agree with Francesca, then you'll vote yes, and if you agree with Jennifer and the chief, you'll vote no.
Is it possible after involved parent we do a period and then in parentheses during initial, as an example, during initial interview?
So e.g.
Yeah. I think that what the chief and Jennifer can speak for herself were talking about was the importance of actually having a person who's not a social worker who's representing the parent in that initial stage. Is that right, Kathy?
Yes, if I could just add a little bit, just to, from my understanding and speaking with the chief, the initial intent of that was that is a key decision point when you're talking, having an initial interview that can go either way to removal or not removal, and the importance of having a parent mentor at that decision point is key because it can really have an impact on the decision of the social worker and the trajectory of that youth and the family.
Last word, Francesca?
I disagree.
Okay. Okay, so, yes, Steve.
So, when it says the initial interview with the social worker, sometimes social workers are out on the scene, even with law enforcement, let's say, doing an interview. And there actually is a protocol for all of this that does not include having a mentor, which would be a major change.
Yes, it would.
On how you investigate these cases, and quite frankly, I'm not sure it's feasible. I mean, you're basically, in certain circumstances, the way this is worded, you're asking law enforcement and a social worker not to conduct an interview until and if a mentor is present, and I'm not sure that's actually feasible in all situations, quite frankly. I think there's a way to word this to say that the goal is to have a mentor as early as possible, including when available at an initial interview, but I'm not sure you can actually do this in all interviews. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. So, but sometimes don't you call in somebody like a cultural broker, though, at that point?
it depends. I mean, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. It depends on the status of the initial investigation. I think the intent behind this was not to do the initial interview. They're not talking, I don't think the intent was when they're necessarily investigating up front in the field. I think this is more designed for a different type of an interview, and that's why the wording in this, I think, should change a little bit.
So since this conversation was in my subcommittee, and Kathy, you were there, and Francesca, you were there, so tell me if you think I have this correct in terms of the conversation. We were talking primarily, I agree that we weren't talking about the situation where, you know, we have joint response and we have law enforcement and a social worker in the field, because it's recognized that law enforcement is going to have priority to conduct their interview on site. But there is typically, through the dependent intake worker, which is after emergency response sometimes, where there is a different interview. Also, when there's not that immediate joint response, there is potentially time to have a mentor involved. What I would say about the way this is written, right now it still says optional. It's not mandating anything, but I think if we take out the reference to at that interview, I mean, we know this is going to be followed down the road. It's going to go to the Board of Supervisors. And I think without that being mentioned as the specific type of neutral objective support we're talking about, I think it really changes the recommendation, and it's not very different from what we have now. So that's why I think it says optional, and we recognized in the conversation that it couldn't happen in every case. And I think Francesca was pretty clear about those types of situations, Steve, that you're referencing, that those would not be possible.
So Jennifer, you mentioned the dependency investigation. That is not the initial interview. So perhaps if it were to say the initial stages versus the initial interview. The initial interview is I get a referral today, I knock on the door. That's the initial. The dependency investigation is at the initial stage, you know, there's an interview within that initial stage. So perhaps if we change initial interview to initial stage, then that broadens it to be able to bring someone in, and I would support that.
Yeah, and I think also there's a difference between a 10-day response where, you know, an interview is going to be scheduled, and I mean, that's feasible. So I think we did understand exactly what you're saying. I'm hesitant to have it taken out entirely. I'm fine with initial stages. I don't know, Kathy, if you feel like that covers.
Or just maybe excluding emergency response situations or circumstances.
Yeah, well, emergency response is pretty much, I mean, even a 10-day is still an emergency response.
So that's why I think initial stages kind of covers that spectrum.
I can live with that compromise. And I think I'm speaking for Laura and Darlene's intention who made this rec.
Kathy, you're okay with that?
Agreed, yes.
Okay, we don't have to take a vote. Stages.
We worked it out.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
I need to make give you a little time check. We were scheduled, we promised people it would be 8:30 to 9:30. We have 2 more minutes before it's 9:30. And we have we're one person over a quorum, so if 2 people leave, we can't actually pass these recommendations. So, but at this time, I would like to, I don't want us to run out the clock on the public, so we do have a card from Joe Harity. So Joe, if you'd like to address us right now, that would be great.
Am I on the clock?
3 minutes.
Okay, cool. Greetings, task force members, co-chairs Dr. Dewan and Scott, Supervisor Chavez. So just let me quickly note that as a community member and someone who spent my career working with system-impacted populations, I'm pleased to see our county taking a hard look at the a hard data-driven look at the totality of at least one of these systems that so deeply impact the lives of young people and young adults. Further, I'm happy to see that many of the task force recommendations target changes that can yield outsized effects in comparison to the investment. Borrowing from LA's work to increase placement with family via simple process changes is such an example. In that vein, I'd like to provide a brief comment on the recommendations made to the task force by the Foster Youth Aligned Action Network, the FION. The work of the FION is about coordination, specifically coordination via common data and a focus on shared results. It is not about reinventing the wheel. Rather, it is about making the car go faster while using less fuel with the wheels that we have. With the remaining time, I want to quickly highlight two important threads of the FEON work. First is a point I have made before in this room. There's only one pathway to self-sufficiency, and that is a good job. And more, there's only one pathway to a good job, post-secondary education or training. This notion is foundational to FEON. And I have some data that underscores this. According to the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce, 99% of jobs created since the Great Recession have gone to those with at least some college. And that is included in the FEON that's in the FEON recommendations as a data point. And according to the Insight Center Self-Sufficiency Standard Tool for California, the minimum income required for a single adult to be self-sufficient in Santa Clara County is a bit more than $33,000 per year. Yet the census data tells us that the median income for Californians over 25 with just a high school diploma is $27,000. Thus, a high school diploma provides young people with little but a pathway to low-wage work unless it is seamlessly linked to post-secondary education and training, which is further connected to good jobs. Second thread, the FEON received a powerful response from key stakeholders. Stakeholders chose to pursue this collaborative endeavor. All one needs to do is take a look at the participant list to see that the work is well beyond task force membership. It includes school districts, community-based organizations, DFCS, COE, young people with lived experience, and critically groups usually not involved, such as the Silicon Valley Organization, the Junior League, Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Folks get it. They see that the status quo is unacceptable, and they are ready to do something about it. I'm seeking a broad recommendation from the task force that the FEON as a group and its recommendations be formally endorsed by the task force as a roadmap and implementing group for solutions related to employment and education support for child welfare youth 14 to 26. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm informed by the clerk we are actually right at quorum. So is there anyone that needs to leave in the next 15 minutes? Oh, thank you. Okay. That's great. Okay.
Coffees and donuts.
So let's move to recommendation number 4. This is one where we did put in an 80% goal. Francesca? Or Steve? One of you has the light on?
Oh, no, I just never turned it off.
Okay. Okay, any changes to that? Okay. Gabriella, were there any wording changes in 5 and 6?
On number 5, we added a bullet point. This recommendation aligns with the work of cross-agency service team because it aims to completely transform the system as it is experienced by youth and families.
I think that was at the suggestion of a committee member.
Of Guardians is a specific category?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we got it. Okay, so anything, and then 6, were there any changes on 6? No changes on 6?
No changes on 6.
Okay, so we move to 7. Any changes on 7?
7, it's just the first line. The county should prioritize placing foster children in familial placements by increasing the recruitment and retention of foster homes, is 1. And including on number 7 is the bullet point. This recommendation aims to streamline foster care licensure processes to better support the certification of potential foster homes. Should I keep going?
We're going to give Francesca a chance.
May I just suggest that you use resource family since that's the new terminology as opposed to foster parents?
Okay, and we can do that throughout the document. Okay. Okay, number 8.
Number 8, there was an added bullet point. This recommendation seeks to support the co-location of the Receiving Assessment Intake Center with the Behavioral Health Services Department and the Spark Clinic. And the second bullet point, this recommendation establishes the county objective to achieve 100% of foster youth in receiving timely medical and dental examinations.
So that's another hard number goal. That's okay. Okay, we're all okay there? All right, moving on to number 9. The Express Pass recommendation, was there any change there?
There was one slight change. It's in the second paragraph. So the Express Pass would get them to the front of the line for county services such as housing, transportation, medical and dental care, behavioral health services, CalFresh, child care, expungement, wraparound services, extended child care, summer activities, and case managers. I see that.
We need a comma after case managers. What was new there? I thought that was all in the first.
There was only summer activities.
Summer activities, okay. So we added summer activities. Okay, number 10 is the transportation.
There's one change. It's the first sentence. It was a change in language.
Oh, right, to remove this obstacle.
Yeah, the county should provide transportation to remove the obstacle to youth and families accessing foster care services.
Okay. And then number 11, the aftercare, was there any change there?
The one added bullet point, which brings in some data. This recommendation establishes the county commitment to ensure that less than 8.9% of exited families re-enter the foster care system following the completion of the reunification process.
Okay, and what's the source of the 8.9% number?
It is from the SIP 2016 to 2017.
Okay, any questions about 11? Okay. We go to 12. Any change on 12?
No changes on 12.
Okay. All right, so now we come to items 13 and 14, John. This is where we split the one recommendation for education and employment into 2.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. You know, I don't actually think that was my comment to split them. I think it might have been Commissioner DeSalvo's comment to split them.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. I'll give Joe credit.
But you know, my general, you know, strong thinking and recommendation about 13 through 16 is that I'd really like to see us call out this work of the FEON, which, you know, as Joe mentioned, is well beyond the task force. There are at least a dozen members of the community that saw this task force work as a call to action. They mobilized, you know, from May through November to really build a strong recommendation. And really, it's a methodology about data-driven and collective impact and very detailed. And so I feel like the way we've got 13 through 16 structured right now, we only actually have the FEON mentioned once. And it's kind of mentioned.
Well, it's mentioned support the work readiness employment work of the FEON. So
well, that's the one time, and the point is, the FEON is much more than work readiness and employment work. The FEON is educational and employment outcomes across the board, and so I feel like it's actually factually inaccurate, or it's an omission. I would say support the educational and employment recommendations of the FEON, not specifically the employment piece.
what was the last thing you said?
Support the educational and employment recommendations of the FEON, and not, right now it only says the employment recommendations. Items 13 and 14 actually are the core recommendations of the FEON, but the FEON's not mentioned there. And I just feel like to recognize the the community-wide effort that was made to mobilize, and actually the work continues. Our current list of recommendation actually calls for the formation of 3 other, prevention task force, a limited time working group for care coordination, a limited term interdisciplinary group. It talks about forming new things, yet nowhere does it come back in and talk about the one thing that's already been formed in response to the task force work.
Well, it also, to be fair, talks about the foster vision and data zone work that we don't want to reinvent, that we're just supporting that going forward also.
Of course.
So, so I think that was the intent of supporting the FION efforts was the intent of recommendation 16. So we could certainly make that more broad to reflect the FION's work. If we call out FION, and for example in 13, FION's not the only player doing educational work, so we'd have to put in all of the school districts and the other folks that are.
Well, actually, the call from the FION went out to every single school district. So every district has been invited in, and many are in.
If you're not, FION is not the major player. I mean, the school districts are not working for FION to deliver educational services. So
the FION is a methodology. It's not an agency. It's not an organization. It's a methodology. It's actually co-chaired by the Office of Education and the Department of Family and Children's Services. And so it's not that it's a single agency or a single group or a static group. It's a methodology calling for broad community support for educational and employment and ultimately income parity for our foster youth. So it's, I just want to, again, to be more specific, I would move that the task force explicitly endorse the FION as a vehicle for education and employment parity for youth that entered the child welfare system.
okay, well, I'll tell you what, John. What we can do is we're hearing what you're saying, and we're definitely going to make a change that will try and satisfy your point. Somewhere in items 13 through 16, perhaps all of them, and that'll be prepared for Superintendent Dewan and Vice President Chavez to vet. I do want to make one point, and that is that in the 16-page FION report, most of the specific recommendations were data recommendations, which are reflected, we think, in the work of recommendations 23 and 24. I personally felt that the biggest takeaway was the rather line in the sand commitment for educational employment parity with the general population, which is reflected in recommendations 13 and 14. The FION report did have this specific recommendation for the Opportunity Center model, which we have in number 15, and then we have this basically an endorsement of FION's body of work in 16, which we can accept as too narrow here. We can broaden that. But I just want to make the point that I don't think that we intentionally.
Right. Yeah, I'm not implying. I love the data recommendations, and I mentioned that last time as well. I just think that 16 is unintentionally narrow and could be viewed. It could be viewed as, later on it looks like it's excluding the education.
Point is absolutely taken.
So I'd recommend that the group work to beef up 16, but I don't recommend tying FION to all the other previous bullets. Just beef up number 16.
Yeah, I think that we can do that, and we'll send out a draft to the folks that are, to everybody on that. Okay, so now we're on item 17, the housing.
No changes.
Were there any changes in any of the housing items?
There was a change to number 20, or I'm so sorry, Number 21, in which we added with coordinated wraparound services. And number 22 was changed to collaborate with Office of Supportive Housing to provide a continuum of housing supports and coordinated supportive services to high entry populations, relatives, and families who are evaluated out of emergency response at the CAN Center and or referred to differential response for engagement into services.
Okay, so this is pretty new substantively, and the idea here is to actually make some of our Measure A housing available to families that are on the verge of getting into a child maltreatment situation because of their housing situation. We want to prevent that, so that's the purpose there. Sherry?
Comment, in the last meeting, the language was offering these housing resources to families at the family maintenance stage of child welfare involvement. And I had brought forward the idea that if we're really thinking of preventing families from further entering the child welfare system, that we should maybe think more upstream in offering these housing resources earlier in the process.
Okay. So anything on any of these housing items? Okay, so now we go to the last three, the very popular data items.
So, Scott, I think I missed the presentation around this, but can someone please explain to me the nexus between the data zone and foster vision? Foster vision is part of data zone. What information are agencies not able to get in the foster vision that requires in the Cindy's push to be part of the data zone? Because the foster vision is the data zone. It's the same information that would be in the data zone goes into the foster vision. So I don't understand.
Right, although the members, the participating agencies are not exactly the same, but.
I can also speak to the difference. In foster vision, we currently only permit viewing of active foster youth cases. And because the work of the Joint Foster Youth Task Force is also about prevention and also support of former foster youth, the larger data set, the more effective tool would be Data Zone. Foster Vision is a very specific module of active foster youth that permits the data sharing between juvenile probation, DFCS, and education. So both are essential, but foster vision alone would be inadequate to support the recommendations of the task force.
So a student that's no longer in the foster system, you still want to have access to that data for what reason?
To monitor the educational and employment outcomes for the students and to help us achieve our goal of parity for students, as well as to coordinate services amongst providers.
Wouldn't it be simpler to just adjust the MOU to include former and current foster youth as opposed to wanting every single data piece for every single student that's not a foster and never was in the foster? I don't get the connection.
The dashboards that would be developed for those students would not be inclusive of every single data element. So the question you're asking is much more about the technical underpinning, but the actual implementation would be dashboard-driven, case management-driven, and the MOUs would spell that out. That's part of what that is describing in number 23, to develop the protocols that make needed data available. So we would still be developing the specifics of what you're describing. But foster vision in and of itself is a very specific module and tool. And Data Zone has the more technical capability and capacity to serve more of the needs of the task force recommendations than foster vision was designed to do.
Well, since the data zone is still under development and since dashboards still haven't been created, it just means to expand the module Foster Vision. That's what I don't get is all the information you want is in Foster Vision, and if you can't get it, then expand the module for Foster Vision. But to connect the two and to have this task force talk about something that has nothing to do with foster youth is way beyond the stretch of this task force.
I think another piece that this task force has really gotten involved and focused on looking at prevention services and support for families. So we felt, I feel, that Data Zone ultimately is a much stronger repository across the entire community to do all the type of work that we want to do. So that's my opinion on why we would want to utilize Data Zone as this community-wide repository. There's so much momentum there, and I think we should continue it.
And there wouldn't be anything, Superintendent Funk, that would happen with Data Zone and any student data that wouldn't be vetted and permitted under the law and by MOU with the school district. So nothing can happen beyond developing the protocols and then negotiating and navigating the support or capacity building that a particular district or agency or group might need. So the protections would be built in. What this recommendation is talking about is supporting those protocols to ensure that the needed data and data coordination can occur in whatever segment it is, whether it's Foster Vision or Data Zone.
And I appreciate that, and I agree with you on that. Everything would have to require the MOU, but we're talking about foster youth. And so connecting the two without building out the foster youth vision piece the way you want it to be, and just say, well, we'll just put it all in the Data Zone and access it that way, that's two separate MOUs. Why not build the foster youth zone the way you want it to be built? Because all the information that you can get on foster youth is there. It's housed right now at the county. There's nothing different that you can't get from Data Zone, is my understanding.
Right, we can get it from Data Zone, but it isn't, and it is not all in Foster Vision. Foster Vision is a very specific module that permits the sharing of information for active foster youth cases. And the recommendation of this task force is to support efforts that would also prevent engagement in the foster care system, as well as to help coordinate and provide better access, early warning systems, et cetera, to ensure the well-being of youth and their educational well-being. That may also help prevent their entry into the foster youth system.
All right, well, I appreciate the conversation.
If I can add something, is that okay?
Yes.
Something like my understanding is when you do types of comparative trends, you need a larger contextual data set that is comprehensive and accurate in order to compare the educational attainment or employment outcomes of foster youth. Like, for example, when you're looking at educational parity, you need to ensure that the high school student population and the data you're tracking on that is accurate in order to create any comparison to outcomes of foster youth.
And you have that through the state dashboard now, same information you're looking for.
There are some differences that the state dashboards are delayed and more summative in nature, and we would be able to develop protocols within Data Zone that would allow also real-time intervention, also to look at data in the aggregate for trends over a longer period of time than what the dashboards are able to do.
Okay, do we have anything else on any of the recommendations?
I'm sorry to do this. Page 20, number 22. It states relative guardians again. I would suggest that it read a continuum of housing supports and coordinated supportive services to families who are evaluated out.
Yeah. Don't be sorry, Francesca. Thank you for the catch. Is there anything else? Okay. Well, we're at the point where someone can make a motion to approve the final report pending the incorporation of changes suggested here as approved by Superintendent Dewan and Vice President Chavez, the committee co-chairs.
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
Okay, discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Well, we have final recommendations.
I'd like to just take a moment to express my gratitude to all of you for your service on the task force. I know it's been a heavy lift of time, both here at the meetings and outside of our meetings. And I'm just very proud to be a member of a community that would be willing to invest so much time and energy on behalf of our young people. So thank you for all of your service to the community.
And on behalf of Cindy, who would have been here if she possibly could have, she's so grateful for everyone coming and contributing their passion and expertise to this process. And this is going to be very, very important as we justify the resources that are going to be required to implement system change to provide provide better outcomes for kids. That's where it is. Dante?
I just had one comment. Through this whole draft, one thing I didn't really see reflected is the importance of relationship for youth, forging strong relationships with youth. And if I can ask anything of this, this committee, and that you can take back with the people that you work with, is start or try to emphasize that the importance of strong relationship building with youth, because we can talk about data, we can talk about all this stuff, but I think one of the biggest reasons we're failing, in my opinion, with some of the issues that we are filling with, like housing and education, etc., wellness, is that our youth don't have strong relationships with the system, even with community partners, a lot of the times. And so I've just been up here listening, but today it's been tough sitting up here. And so I would say that that's the only thing I would truly ask for is we have to learn how to focus on building strong relationships, from the top to the bottom, because if not, I think we can make a small impact, but I don't think we're going to ever get to the goal of having true success and outcomes for youth in this county.
Thank you. Well said.
Dante has the last word. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.